A historical inversion. Germany in the autumn of 1931. Welcome back. Today, our purpose is twofold: to confront the dramatic echoes of history, and in doing so, to master the English language. Let the past be your guide, connecting you not merely to facts, but to the enduring soul of humanity. Listen closely, internalizing the cadence and profound rhythm of this chronicle. Ensure your subscription is active so that no subsequent chapter of this story is missed. Let's begin. You've noticed, perhaps with a sense of unease, that this is not our accustomed format. Indeed, the violence that has come to consume the streets throughout the year 1931 has forced us into the shadows. Our very offices were targeted not once, but twice, compelling us to continue our broadcast from a secret, undisclosed location. We will now be delivering our observations quarterly. This, then, is the autumn edition of 1931, spanning the tumultuous months of October, November, and December. One might naturally inquire as to the identity of our attackers. Was it the Communists, the National Socialists, or perhaps the conservative Stahlhelm? The truth remains obscured. Our blunt coverage of German affairs has earned us enmity from more than one faction. Yet, in contemplating this violence, one recalls the sobering words of former French Prime Minister Aristide Briand. Have you noticed how alike the National Socialists, the Nazis, and the Communists are? You only need to listen to their speeches. The arguments are so similar that you have to wait until the end to see whether the audience gives straight arms, salutes, or raises clenched fists. This autumn, however, the shadows deepen, offering a chilling glimpse of the potential reality should the Nazis ever grasp the reins of power. The deepening economic abyss. As 1931 drew to a close, what was the outlook for the German people? They were now firmly entrenched within a global depression, and the year was one of profound, worsening economic crisis. The small business sector suffered grievously, with retail sales plummeting by 30%, while bankruptcies surged by 20%. By the 8th of January, the number of unemployed had already reached 4.5 million, an alarming figure that would climb even further to a staggering 6 million by the year's end. This compelled the government to implement increasingly drastic austerity measures. Heinrich Brüning, the German chancellor, pursued his economic policies with little regard for public sentiment, operating on the conviction that deep public spending cuts and a lowered standard of living were the harsh, but necessary, medicine for achieving a balanced budget. Yet, as we have chronicled, this very economic pain became the fuel for Adolf Hitler and the National Socialist movement. At the dawn of 1931, the Nazi Party counted 389,000 members. As the year concluded, that total had soared to 846,294, a more than doubling of their strength. Political intrigue and the Chancellor's plight. Meanwhile, Chancellor Brüning's popularity sank to new depths. President Paul von Hindenburg had grown frustrated with the sheer frequency of Brüning's emergency decrees, which were issued in the president's name and perpetually controversial. Hindenburg desired a shakeup in Brüning's cabinet, demanding the inclusion of two fiercely nationalist parties, the right-wing DNVP, German National People's Party, and the extremist NSDAP, Nazis, a move Brüning had staunchly resisted. Hindenburg's chief, behind-the-scenes advisor, Kurt von Schleicher, shared this frustration with Brüning and sought his removal. Schleicher's subtle undermining reached the point where Hindenburg was, at times, on the very precipice of summarily dismissing the chancellor. Both Schleicher and the president were pressing Brüning to restructure his cabinet, shifting its alignment firmly to the right. Brüning recognized that their confidence in him was fatally eroding, and the relationship only worsened. In a fraught moment, Brüning suggested that Hindenburg meet with Hitler. The president was utterly outraged. His objection stemmed not from Hitler's political platform, but from his background, his military rank, social standing, and likely his national origins. "I really cannot be made to converse with this Austrian private," Hindenburg reportedly told Brüning. feeling that too much of his personal honor and convictions were being sacrificed. Brüning noted he had never before heard such a tone from the revered field marshal. Yet, Schleicher's machinations were not entirely clandestine. As early as September, he argued that Hitler could no longer be dismissed as a mere sideshow, but must be acknowledged as a serious political force. He advised Brüning to not only shuffle his cabinet with a stronger nationalist representation, but to offer Hitler a post, believing this would effectively tame him. Schleicher further theorized that an alliance between the conservative elite and Hitler would provide the popular legitimacy required for a far-reaching, authoritarian revision of the German constitution. Brüning's reply was sharp. He viewed it as a crime to violate the constitution when, through his secret pact of toleration with the Social Democrats, he maintained a Reichstag majority against any vote of no confidence. The devil in a top hat. Into this volatile mix stepped a new figure who supported this idea of taming Hitler, Franz von Papen. Who was this man? During the Great War, the United States had infamously branded him the devil in a top hat. He had served as a military attaché in Washington, D.C., but was expelled and charged with sabotage after engaging in illegal espionage. Von Papen possessed significant aristocratic credentials, hailing from the Westphalian Catholic nobility and marrying into even greater wealth. An officer in the Imperial German Army, he commanded troops on the Western Front and later the Palestine Front. After his expulsion from America, post-war, he served in the Prussian Parliament, was a part owner of the Center Party newspaper Germania, and was known for his anti-socialist, anti-Republican speeches in the Prussian Landtag. His relevance now stems from Schleicher bringing him into Hindenburg's inner circle, viewing von Papen as potentially the ideal replacement for Brüning, not just for his views, but because he seemed rather pliable. A description from a French ambassador painted the picture succinctly. Papen is to some extent the butt of others' jokes. They rib him mercilessly. Though he takes it all in good part, he is a favorite of the field marshal. His vivacity and cheerfulness help distract the old man. He flatters him with his deference and devotion. Schleicher tasked von Papen with convincing Brüning that the strategy of accommodating and thus taming Hitler was sound. In September, von Papen met with Brüning and the Center Party's wealthiest donor, Peter Klockner, urging Brüning to strike a deal with Hitler to prolong Hindenburg's term as president, thereby avoiding the upcoming spring election. Brüning remained uninterested. Then, on October 2nd, von Papen, in a major public address, publicly demanded that Brüning establish a dictatorship on a nationalist basis that would dismantle the parliamentary system and integrate the DNVP and the Nazis into the government. The very next day, Schleicher met with Hitler. Hitler stated he would personally enter the government only on the condition that fresh elections were called and the Nazis were allowed to form the government. Schleicher took this as a sign that Hitler was genuinely sincere about his stated commitment to acquiring power through legal means. Confident in this assessment, Schleicher then managed to persuade Hindenburg to meet with Hitler. The October reshuffle and the presidential dictate. Amidst this flurry of political maneuvering, Schleicher advised Brüning that if he could not secure a functional majority, his best course of action would be to dissolve the Reichstag indefinitely. Brüning, already committed to a minor cabinet reshuffle in the hopes of mollifying Hindenburg, proceeded with his plan. On October 6th, Brüning issued the third emergency decree for the protection of the economy and finances. Such decrees were technically presidential decrees, permitted under Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution. This decree granted the police enhanced powers to control the now commonplace street riots, reduced the duration for which one could receive unemployment insurance payments, and lowered the pension payment for government employees from 80% of final salary to 75%. That same day, Brüning and his entire cabinet resigned. Foreign Minister Julius Curtius had actually resigned on the 3rd, following the failure of the proposed German-Austrian customs union. Hindenburg promptly requested that Brüning form a new government, one with no political commitments to any party. This new structure was to be a presidential cabinet, lacking a formal coalition agreement, and entirely dependent on Hindenburg and Brüning managing affairs, through decree under Article 48. On the 9th of October, Brüning established the new government, which, frankly, differed little from its predecessor. Brüning took on the role of foreign minister himself, in addition to his chancellorship. Wilhelm Groener, an independent, replaced the Center Party's Joseph Wirth as Minister of the Interior. Groener already held the Defense Ministry portfolio, which remained unchanged. Crucially, he now commanded both the army and the police force. While a few new faces were present, this cabinet had an even smaller base of support in the Reichstag than the previous one. Adolf Hitler immediately condemned this new cabinet as being just as unrepresentative of the popular will as the last. The corporal and the field marshal, Brüning, following von Papen's suggestion, met with Hitler on the very next day, October the 10th, and asked his opinion on a constitutional amendment that would allow Hindenburg to remain president without a new election. Hitler declared himself against the idea. Later that same day, Hitler, accompanied by the Nazi Party member of Parliament, Hermann Göring, met President Paul von Hindenburg in person for the first time. During the encounter, Hitler reportedly stressed his profound reverence for the president before launching into a lengthy monologue condemning the bankruptcy of the Weimar political system. The initial reports suggested Hindenburg was distinctly unimpressed by the Bohemian corporal at the meeting, telling Schleicher he found Hitler uncouth and entirely unsuited to the role of chancellor. Yet, this was not the complete picture. Hindenburg also informed Kurt von Plettenberg, one of his old army comrades, that he had found Hitler quite appealing during their conversation. Furthermore, in a letter to his daughter on the 14th of October, Hindenburg did not rule out the possibility of bringing Hitler into the government, provided the Nazi leader moderated his behavior. Brüning, for his part, considered Hindenburg's meeting a profound error, believing it would lend legitimacy to Hitler in the eyes of high-ranking army officers, with Hindenburg, of course, being the most legendary German officer of all. The Harzburg Front and the Parliament's retreat. On October the 11th, the very next day, the so-called national opposition convened in Bad Harzburg. This gathering assembled a coalition of right-wing organizations, including the DNVP, the Nazis, the Stahlhelm, the Pan-German League, and others. The purpose was to forge a united Harzburg Front, a concerted unity of right-wing groups dedicated to toppling the Brüning government. The event featured military parades, and Alfred Hugenberg of the DNVP opened the proceedings with a passionate tirade against the Red Peril and cultural Bolshevism. Hitler also spoke, asserting that the entire German political structure required a root and branch rebuilding, declaring that either nationalism or Marxism would ultimately prevail in Germany. There could be no middle ground. Former National Bank President Hjalmar Schacht declared Hitler to be Germany's last hope for order and decency. He also claimed that the National Bank was intentionally concealing the true severity of the country's financial position merely to prop up Brüning's government. It should be noted that while many prominent business leaders and captains of industry were invited to Bad Harzburg, they notably did not attend. In Berlin, Brüning presided over the Reichstag's first session since March on October the 13th. The DNVP and the Nazis immediately tabled a motion of no confidence in Brüning's government. After 3 days of intense debate, the motion was defeated, though by a relatively narrow margin. The Reichstag then formally voted to adjourn until the following February. Brüning, now confirmed to rule solely by presidential decree, vowed that the parliamentary system would be reinstated once the economic crisis had abated. November brought its own dramatic developments. On the 15th, in the Hesse state elections, the Nazis secured 37.4% of the vote, making them the largest party in that state. It was now quite clear that, were national elections to be held soon, Hitler and the Nazis would likely achieve a dominant result. An alarming incident in Hesse. However, an incident in Hesse shortly thereafter raised serious alarms. On November the 25th, Karl Severing, the Prussian Minister of the Interior, announced that a member of the Hessian parliament, a certain Dr. Wilhelm Schaefer, had been forced to vacate his office because his claims of holding a doctorate was found to be spurious, had handed over some explosive documents to the local police. What manner of documents, you ask? They were Nazi party papers prepared by a lawyer named Werner Best, containing the minutes of a meeting of regional Nazi leaders held at Boxheimerhof, near Lamperheim in Hesse. Several such planning sessions had taken place there over the preceding months. Best, a Nazi himself, had been the one to compel Schaefer, also a Nazi, to resign from the Landtag for his fabricated curriculum vitae. This led Schaefer, who had attended a few of the Boxheim meetings, to distance himself from the party and deliver the documents. The Boxheim Papers, a blueprint for brutality. The documents provided a chillingly clear outline of the local party's contingency plans should a communist coup erupt in Hesse. The proposal dictated that, firstly, the SA, the Nazi Party, paramilitary organization, would ruthlessly crush the communists and then unleash a period of brutal, armed revenge. Armed Nazi groups would be granted unlimited executive authority, and all political opponents would be immediately rounded up and confined in camps. Any individual who resisted the new decrees would be shot dead on the spot, and all residents would be given a mere 24 hours to surrender any weapons or face execution. Furthermore, all food supplies would be seized and centrally stored, and the private sale or exchange of food would be strictly prohibited. Compulsory work service would be mandated for all Germans over the age of 16, and food would be distributed solely based on the fulfillment of this obligation. Since Jews would not be allowed to work, the chilling corollary was that they would receive no food. The Boxheim Papers, as they quickly became known, sent a shockwave through the nation when their contents were made public. Indeed, the documents caused not only a national outcry but a considerable international stir. It is worth noting that Severing and Wilhelm Leuschner, the former Hessian Minister of the Interior, were both staunch Social Democrats and had long sought grounds to prosecute the Nazi Party for treason. Leuschner had often clashed with Best in the Landtag, and these papers, prepared by Best, appeared to offer the perfect evidence to expose the duplicitous and illegal nature of the Nazi Party, a brutal dictatorship that would emerge should Hitler ever seize power. Hitler's performance of legality. The Boxheim Papers were undeniably embarrassing for Hitler. On the 26th of November, Hermann Göring issued a press release, emphatically stating that the Nazi Party leadership had absolutely nothing to do with these disturbing papers, and that they did not reflect the views of the leadership. The Reich Ministry of Justice reviewed the case but concluded that the documents did not constitute treason, arguing that treason involved the intention to overthrow the government, whereas these plans were framed as a reaction to someone else doing so. Hitler himself intervened in December, granting several interviews and proclaiming that he had no intentions whatsoever of overthrowing the government, either locally or nationally. On the 4th of December, he held an international press conference in Berlin, where he was quoted as saying, "It will not be necessary for me to seize power in a coup d'etat. It will be mine within a short time anyway, since every election brings my party closer to power." He assured the New York Times that the National Socialist movement will win power in Germany by methods permitted by the present constitution, in a purely legal way. To the matter, London Times, he dismissed the Boxheim Papers as insignificant and irrelevant. Furthermore, in a two-part message published in the Nazi Party newspaper, Völkischer Beobachter, on the 13th and 14th of December, he asserted his desire for peace for Germany and all of Europe, positioning his movement not as one of desperation, but of hope. Dorothy Thompson, the American journalist who met Hitler in person for the first time in November, was personally told by him that he would take power only legally, but would then abolish the Weimar Parliament and Constitution thereafter. She remained deeply skeptical. While she recognized the anti-Semitic mania without which the Nazis' entire platform would collapse, she doubted that the drummer boy, as she called Hitler, would ever win over the German people with such lies, noting that neither Hitler nor Goebbels belonged to the Nordic Aryan elite they constantly championed. Yet, one must ask, Had she read what Hitler himself penned in Mein Kampf? The broad masses themselves often tell small lies in little matters, but would be ashamed to resort to large-scale falsehoods. It would never come into their heads to fabricate colossal untruths, and they would not believe that others could have the impudence to distort the truth so infamously. Brüning's response in the Fourth Decree. The Boxheim papers galvanized Chancellor Heinrich Brüning into decisive action. In a radio broadcast on December the 8th, he issued a sharp commentary. The leader of the National Socialists has emphasized the legal methods and goals of his political intentions. Nevertheless, one cannot ignore the sharp contrast to these assurances provided by the violent assertions of no less responsible leaders of this same party who continue to incite Germans to senseless civil war and diplomatic follies. When one declares that one intends to break down legal barriers once one has come to power in legal ways, then one is no longer observing legality, particularly if clandestine plans are simultaneously being made for revenge. Brüning's address did not end there. He also announced a fourth emergency decree for securing the economy and finances and for the purposes of political riot control. The decree itself was 48 pages long, but key provisions included a 9% reduction in the salaries of government employees, a 1% cut in interest rates, bringing them to 6%, and the end of government assistance for residential building. A new commissioner for price controls was established, alongside a 25% tax on what the decree termed national deserters, German citizens, who had sold German assets to escape German taxes. Predictably, this decree was highly unpopular. The hypnotist and the SA. While Brüning's policies earned him public scorn, one figure enjoying immense popularity was Erich Jan Hanussen, the famous mentalist, hypnotist, and clairvoyant. Hanussen had become a genuine star and was also a loyal Nazi Party member, having even converted from Judaism to Protestantism. In October, while in a trance, he dictated a novel, SOS, onto wax cylinders, but the public was far more interested in his published predictions. The Berlin Illustrated Evening Edition had published the transcript of a session where Hanussen answered questions about a trip to New York in the year 2500. He prophesied, "Where New York once stood, there is now sea." I don't know the date when it happened, but there was a terrible catastrophe. The whole city was submerged during this catastrophe. Everyone perished. Ships, people, houses. Yes, the buildings collapsed like a house of cards. Later, Hanussen revised his prediction, giving a precise date for New York's destruction, the year 2000. And what of Berlin in 2500? His brusque reply was, "It's not a city, it's a country stretching far and wide. Gardens, happy people live here, contented people." That idyllic vision was far from the reality of Berlin in 1931, a city anything but happy and contented, where the levels of aggression and street confrontation seemed to escalate with every election. Hanussen, however, was clearly content and now famous across Europe, with his political allegiance undeniable. The front mudguard of his luxury Italian car proudly bore the standard of the SA whenever he lent the vehicle to party friends. His secretary, assistant, chauffeur, and manager, every last one of them, was a National Socialist. Hanussen bought the services of the SA, providing funds for boots, uniforms, and food, alongside free tickets to his performances. In return, the stormtroopers protected his shows from disruption. Eventually, as a supporting member of the SA, his secretary recalled, "The magician takes to wearing the uniform of the Sturmabteilung himself now and then in the office or on the street." This celebrity endorsement provided the Nazi movement with a valuable, albeit superficial, sense of legitimacy. Concluding notes of the quarter. To conclude this quarter's broadcast, we have two final notes concerning other internationally known figures. On October the 24th, in Chicago, Al Capone was sentenced to 11 years in prison for tax evasion. And on November the 20th in Spain, King Alfonso XIII was found guilty of high treason and breach of the Constitution by the Spanish Parliament. A new Republican Constitution was officially introduced on December the 9th, and so, the year comes to its end, and this night, 1931, will segue into 1932. One can only hope that the new year brings less turbulence and significantly less economic hardship to the people of Germany. President Paul von Hindenburg offered a national radio broadcast to his people on New Year's Eve, stating that Germans deserved thanks and praise for the sacrifices they had made and the patience with which they had borne their sufferings and burdens. He argued that the greatness of their sacrifice justifies Germany's demand that foreign countries should not seek to oppose Germany's recovery through the imposition of impossible conditions. However, the broadcast was dramatically interrupted by a group of communists bursting into the studio. One voice shouted over the airwaves, "Attention Germany, Red fighters are here." A less turbulent year in 1932? This final act of confrontation does not bode well for that hope. But whatever unfolds, I shall be here to chronicle it. And that's all for today's journey through history and language. If these stories touched your heart, remember every time you learn a new word, you're keeping a piece of history alive. So keep listening, keep feeling, and keep discovering the world through English. Thank you for staying with us until now. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, because next time, we'll travel even deeper into the past together. Until then, take care, keep learning, and never stop exploring the story of humanity.